Tyler Perry wasn't the star expected to steal the spotlight during the 25th BET Awards. People gathered to enjoy the showbiz glamour and witness a few memorable moments. However, no one anticipated that Perry, the quiet but influential Hollywood figure and a known supporter of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, would take the stage and share what felt like a big revelation. While his delivery wasn't overly dramatic, the meaning behind his words cut through Meghan's polished public persona with surprising clarity. Let's take a step back for context. In 2020, when Harry and Meghan decided to step away from their royal duties, it was Perry who stepped up to help them when they needed it most. He offered them his luxurious $18 million home in Beverly Hills, ensured they had security, covered their expenses, and made sure they were comfortable. At the time, it looked like a generous move from a friend who understood the pressure of fame and public scrutiny. What we didn't see behind the scenes was how that friendship slowly turned into a one-sided transaction that Perry says left him emotionally and financially drained, and that's what made his speech at the BET Award so shocking. Meghan directly approached him, but he felt he didn't really have to respond. He shared a story about how he had offered to help someone by giving them his home and support, only to be ignored once they got what they needed from him. Some people take kindness for granted without ever giving anything back. He mentioned that even though the cameras were focused on him, everyone who knew the background understood exactly who he was talking about. Behind the scenes, Perry had apparently been holding back his feelings for a long time, but something changed this time. It all began when Meghan asked to use his private jet without discussing any details or costs. When Perry said no, not because he couldn't afford it, but because he felt like she was taking advantage of him, Meghan reportedly got upset. Perry later told his friends that this was a key moment for him. What started as a friendly favor had turned into a situation where he felt some people had a sense of entitlement. He wasn't the only one feeling this way. Many of his friends, staff, and colleagues began advising him about their concerns in private. Meghan has a way of collecting favors from people without ever returning them. She treats these favors like a form of social currency, and when they no longer fit into her story, she simply cuts those people out of her life. At first, Perry turned a blind eye to the gossip around him. He thought he was helping two people who were struggling. However, as time went by and the deals for movies and music came through, along with the piles of money, Perry noticed that the gratitude he expected was missing. It became clear that Meghan had no intention of giving back. When Perry took the stage that night, he wasn't just sharing a story, he was making a bold point that even the kindest people have their limits. When pushed too far, they won't stay silent anymore. Had crafted her public image as a misunderstood woman who had been silenced. Perry, who was not part of the royal family or the tabloids, was the one who had opened his home to her without asking for anything in return. Now, he was publicly calling her out. At that moment, everyone watching, both in the venue and online, saw a new version of the fairy tale, a story where the so-called savior turns into a whistleblower and Hollywood's nicest guy finally says, "I've had enough." What made it hit even harder was the timing. Meghan and Harry had just started pitching a new documentary about power and freedom, but after Perry's speech, investors started backing out. The trust was shattered and Meghan lost her last real supporter. The consequences were immediate. Hollywood, a place that usually stays neutral in public conflicts, was shaken up, especially when someone like Tyler Perry, a highly respected figure in the industry, started to distance himself. Known for his successful studio and classy demeanor, Perry's comments carried significant weight. When someone of his stature publicly criticizes someone he once backed, it sends shockwaves through the industry. The very next day, calls began to circulate. A producer who was involved in Meghan and Harry's latest Netflix project decided to pull out. After the BET Awards aired, another investor who had already participated in 2 planning meetings announced they wanted to step away, stating, "I don't want to be part of something that feels this toxic." This wasn't about the project itself, but rather the people behind it. Meghan's name, once considered a strong selling point for companies seeking to appear modern and inclusive, was suddenly being viewed as a warning sign. Meghan's public relations team was in a frenzy. They reached out to big news outlets to try to change the story about her and her friend Perry. They painted Perry as someone bitter and out of touch, someone who didn't understand Meghan's true intentions. They offered exclusive interviews and behind-the-scenes clips and even suggested doing a podcast to defend her, but none of it worked. The journalists weren't convinced. In fact, their efforts seemed to backfire. It came across as desperate, and the more they pushed, the more people started to wonder what they were trying to hide. Behind the scenes, things were getting even more complicated. Friends of Perry began to share that he hadn't wanted to go public with his feelings, but felt pressured after being emotionally manipulated for so long. He had spent months deciding whether or not to speak up. The breaking point wasn't just a private jet incident or a poorly thought-out business proposal. It was when he realized that Meghan wasn't just ungrateful. She was using their friendship to gain more influence. One person close to Perry's team mentioned that Meghan had tried to use Perry's name to get access to a funding circle earlier in 2024. During a meeting where she was pitching a new media project, she mentioned a man's support without asking for his permission, implying he was a quiet supporter of her venture. When he found out, he was furious. To protect his reputation and clarify the situation, he decided to speak out publicly, which encouraged others to share their experiences too. A former assistant from her team described the work environment as incredibly draining. They said she controlled every story, expected absolute loyalty, and punished anyone to challenge her choices. A producer who had worked on a now-canceled Spotify deal with the couple commented that her obsession with perfection stifled creativity. Instead of wanting true partners, she preferred people who would always agree with her. Even those in Oprah's circle, once closely connected to her, started to pull away quietly. Sources claimed there hadn't been any friendly chats between the two groups for months. When the man made his public comments, Oprah's team didn't respond at all. There was no defense, no support, just silence. It seemed like everything was starting to unravel. Meghan had portrayed herself as a strong figure representing female empowerment and independence, but now that image was being challenged by those who had once stood by her side. It felt as if a mask had been removed. The stories that emerged weren't from tabloids, they came from people who had worked closely with her, some of whom had even helped her during tough times. As the days went by, what began as one person's honest statement turned into a significant cultural movement. Meghan Markle was no longer seen as untouchable, and the fallout affected more than just her public image. It started hitting her bank accounts with Netflix, reportedly reevaluating its long-term commitment, and other potential investors pulling out. Archwell's financial future looked shaky. Sources close to them revealed that several internal projects had already been paused. Scheduled hires were frozen. Budget reviews were happening weekly. What was once a booming brand backed by celebrity buzz and major platforms was now surrounded by hesitation and damage control. Public trust was unraveling too much and had long cultivated the image of a misunderstood woman navigating royal oppression. She was the voice of empowerment, the underdog who took on the monarch. Now, with insiders sharing stories of emotional manipulation, excessive demands, and selective loyalty, people started questioning how much of that story was ever true. Social media sentiment, once split, began leaning heavily towards skepticism. Hashtags that once supported her were now flooded with criticism, memes, and side-by-side comparisons, painting her as entitled and disingenuous for Meghan, who had meticulously curated every aspect of her public image. This situation went beyond just a public relations setback. It turned into a crisis of identity for her. The images and stories she used to promote herself, like being a feminist role model, a victim of royal mistreatment, and a successful media entrepreneur, were all being questioned and challenged right in front of everyone. Even her longtime supporters became quiet, and media outlets that used to eagerly share positive stories about her were now hesitant. No one wanted to be associated with a brand that seemed to be collapsing behind the scenes. Insiders noted that Meghan was extremely anxious during this time. She sent angry text messages to a close friend, Perry, expressing feelings of betrayal and humiliation and worrying about the impact on her family's reputation. But Perry didn't respond. He simply chose to remain silent, and that silence spoke volumes. People close to him started to confirm that he had been placed in a tough position for years, feeling pressured to support her while being quiet about his own feelings. More voices joined in to share their experiences. One public relations expert disclosed that Meghan's team tried to shut out journalists who dared to ask difficult questions. A former consultant mentioned that Meghan often disregarded advice if it didn't fit her personal story. Additionally, a former employee described the work environment as one where appreciation seemed to disappear. The stories surrounding Meghan Markle were troubling, not because they were full of drama, but because they revealed a pattern of control, manipulation, and emotional pressure. Even the big names in Hollywood, who typically stay neutral, started to tread carefully when talking about her. Studio executives joked that working with Meghan's team was like trying to play chess with a mirror. Nothing ever reflected back, and everything felt like a spin on the truth. Then came the numbers. A recent survey showed that support for Meghan and Harry in the US had dropped by over 30% in just a year. In the UK, they were already seen as outcasts by many people. Now, the consequences were apparent. Global sponsors were pulling away, and potential partners were suddenly uninterested. Meghan's once promising career was now viewed as a cautionary tale. Throughout all this, Harry mostly stayed quiet. Some believe he's trying to piece together what's left of their public image behind the scenes, while others think he's just worn out from years of media conflicts and family drama, especially with their inner circle crumbling. Tyler Perry's speech about the situation wasn't loud or filled with anger, but it was powerful and precise. which made it impactful. It didn't just highlight one specific incident, it revealed an ongoing issue. In an industry where reputation means everything, Meghan has just learned that even someone with royal connections can cast aside. Not once, but twice. First, she was distanced from the royal family, and now she seems to be pushed away from popular culture.